All right. In today's conversation, we have some community values that we've set for ourselves. So I'll have Juliana introduce those.
Yeah, so some of the community values we came up with is we really want y'all to stay engaged, lean into discomfort, expect and accept a lack of closure, and share the air. And we also wanted to give a quick content warning because we will be delving into some, pretty serious and heavy topics such as COVID, mental health, and drug use.
And for today's conversation, we hope to engage in community conversations on self-care, community care, also known as communities of care, the impact of COVID-19, how we can engage in community, and how we can share resources. There will be opportunities to share your thoughts in chat, and I'll take a moment now to see if there's any thoughts on what you all hope to learn today. But there'll be chances throughout, there'll be discussion questions and opportunities to share your thoughts as well as resources. We hope we can cover everything today, but recognize we only have an hour today. So we encourage you all to continue these conversations with your colleagues, friends, family, and your own community. And speaking of community, Juliana will now situate us with what's going on now in the San Diego community.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go over some statistics and kind of contextualize our experience with COVID within San Diego and California. So right now, roughly 70% of California's population is vaccinated, which means either the first dose, second dose, or all three. San Diego actually accounts for 11% of the COVID cases in California. And as I was doing research for this presentation, at the time, there was 136,339 COVID cases here in San Diego. So as we've seen, COVID definitely has had many negative impacts on our society, and I just wanted to highlight some of these impacts here. So chronic pain has skyrocketed, opioid overdose has increased by 40%, and suicide hotline usage has increased by 8,000% over the course of this pandemic. As we've seen, there's also been a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities. And in general, there have been feelings of isolation, financial burden, increased drug use, anxiety, and depression come out of this pandemic. And one of the main impacts that we are really going to focus on today is the impact of COVID on the community is a sense of loneliness. We've had to isolate ourselves from one another, and we've been spending a lot of time at home alone. And overall, this feeling of burnout and isolation is definitely something that can be super difficult to navigate or gain a sense of control over, since this has been our reality for about 2 years now. And over these few years, we have seen, the government try to support us in certain ways. And the biggest way is providing relief through the development of a vaccine. But rather than, addressing the larger structural issues that are enabling the COVID spread, such as capitalism and broken infrastructure, combating COVID is really now placed on us, the individual. We're encouraged to wear masks, get vaccinated, and socially distance and stay at home when we're not feeling well. And while those practices are, super important and have definitely decreased the spread of COVID, the narrative has now shifted, and a lot of the blame and responsibility is placed on the individual. And it can almost be seen as like this personal or moral failure if you get COVID, which is not true. And that is why now more than ever, taking care of yourself is super crucial. Utilizing practices such as self-care can help alleviate the stress and the pain that comes with living through a pandemic.
Thank you.
So I wanted to.
Oh, sorry.
So I wanted to talk about self-care a little bit more and what is self-care and the history of it. So our definition is it can be defined as any set of practices that makes you feel nourished, whether that's physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And a quick history. So in the 50s and 60s, doctors were recommending self-care to people who had repeated exposure to trauma, pain, or had any mental health challenges. In the 70s, we've seen this movement become more popularized within the Black Panther Party. They used self-care and community care as acts of resistance and resilience amidst racism. So a lot of initiatives that came out of that movement were community initiatives such as healthcare clinics. And if you're familiar with self-care, you may have heard it a lot recently because it's really become this popular kind of buzzword that we see a lot on social media. There's hashtag self-care that gets posted a lot. And self-care is now a multi-million dollar industry. And it really emphasizes consumption. So this idea that you have to buy certain products or certain, exercise machines or certain things to practice self-care, which is not necessarily true. And we'll talk about that more. And it's usually centered on the white experience and is usually promoted by like white social media influencers.
Now I'll say thank you, Juliana. I think self-care is so important, and I'm really happy to be engaging in this discussion with everyone today. And for our first discussion question or check-in question, we would like to know, what have you been doing to take care of yourself during the pandemic? We welcome you all to share in chat, remembering to set your chat to everyone. And for myself, while y'all type, I have come to know the hard way how important it is to get outside, enjoy the fresh air and the sunlight. But at times I would get really hard on myself for not going outside or not getting in the sun. Like, oh my gosh, like, why did I forget again? And being hard on myself. So it was starting to have like this negative impact on me to have that expectation to go outside. So I've started practicing allowing myself grace in feeling like staying inside is just better some days if I feel lazy one day, or if I'm too busy to get outside, like allowing myself grace that that's okay, and giving my body additional like vitamin D supplements when needed. And this has allowed me to feel that going outside is not just something I need to check off or like I have to do it, but it really allows me to just enjoy it when I do get to do it. So yeah. And now that the weather is getting warmer too, I'm really excited. Yeah, so taking walks is a great way to do so. Going to sleep at a reasonable time, working out, vitamins, absolutely. Finding opportunities to laugh, I think, is so important, even when it's just at yourself sometimes. I'll leave space for other thoughts, or Juliana, if you want to share.
Yeah, for sure. Self-care to me has really looked like journaling and, getting a lot of the feelings that I've been feeling out on paper and try not to like internalize any of the anxiety or, the fear that has been going on during this pandemic. So journaling has definitely been a really good resource for me. And also just picking up different hobbies and stuff and really trying to find a creative outlet to explore.
Yeah, I see another response in the chat. Listening to podcasts of folks that inspire me, connect with me, sense of purpose. Oh, sorry, connect me with a sense of purpose. Walks with my dog, reading for joy. Yes, all of this is so important. And I love to see how everybody's methods of self-care are all like a little bit different. But I see like some common themes of moving our bodies, finding outlets, connecting with folks. So that's really great. You all can feel free to keep sharing. I will move on to the next slide, which is on community care. So again, thank you all for sharing your forms of self-care. We're going to now dive into the concept of community care. So I will note that when we first started researching this topic and I did a quick Google search of community care, it brought up some things around like the medical field. Specifically, it was like assisted living centers near me and medical clinics. And while that is absolutely a vital form of support for many people, the definition of the concept of community care that we're working with today is a bit different. This video of Travis Heath speaking at TEDx MSU Denver on self-care to communities of care provides a better example to situate us in the community care that we are talking about today. And I just want to note that we are jumping into the last 5 minutes or so of this talk. It is a 50-minute video. So for context, Travis is a therapist and has been speaking about a couple of patients to demonstrate the concept of community care through them as examples. In particular, he earlier mentioned a young man who's working through thoughts of violence against others, and a new mother who is facing postpartum depression and working through thoughts of self-inflicted violence. I encourage you all to watch the rest of this video, which can be found on YouTube after the webinar, and we will share a sources link towards the end.
Now, if I could go back to the woman I was talking about who was feeling depressed after giving birth, so what did we do together? Well, I asked her a question. I said, hey, if you lived in a society where male partners, and this is a heteronormative example, excuse that, it's just she had a male partner. If you lived in a society where 50% of all child-rearing duties were taken up by men, do you think you'd feel more depressed or less depressed? That was her reaction, and she goes, oh, less depressed. And would it surprise you to know I've asked many women this question over the last decade plus, and unanimously they say less depressed. Now, you could say, well, those are her words, she's just saying that. Well, we put this to the test. We get a systemic intervention. We invite her male partner in to stand in support of her in these ways, and do you know what happens to the depression? It starts to go down. If this is something that's located solely in her, then why does a systemic intervention cause it to go down, right? What it seems like we're doing in this case, and other cases like it, is we're asking a woman to self-care her way out of social inequity. That feels like a bad recipe to me, okay? So what do I propose as an alternative? Maybe we'd call it communities of care. Now, when I say that, the first thing people think is, oh, it's like group therapy, people getting together and talking about distress. While I think that can be lovely, I think it ignores one very important variable, and that variable is power, okay? When I talk about communities of care, well, can you imagine for a moment, like for those of us who have relative positions of power in the room, right? If you go, oh, communities of care, this sounds very kumbaya, this is great. If you start doing this work, I'll warn you, it's painful, because what you start to do is you interrogate the systems in which you have power over, and you often find out that you are holding up values and ideas that you don't even stand for. But those values and ideas are so deeply woven into the culture that you don't realize you're standing for them, right? Now, this could be at home, this could be in the workplace, this could be in your community, right? It could be all over. I can't tell you how to interrogate these systems because your systems are unique to you, but I feel like I owe you a general example. So let's take the workplace. In the workplace where you're in a relative position of power, are you dehumanizing, even if unwittingly, dehumanizing people through overwork? Are you defining their character, their worth as a human being by whether or not they produce? Right? These kinds of ideas. If we start in our relative positions of power to change these systems, guess what? People don't have to self-care their way out of them then, right? Because we are systemically taking this on. Look, the way self-care currently exists, largely in the Western world, is a lot like a boxing match. Okay? You have two people in the ring beating the hell out of one another. They go to their neutral corners for 60 seconds. They put the little glue over the cut so it doesn't gush blood, and they put some ice over the swelling to bring it down. But the problem is, we send them right back into the ring to start getting bludgeoned again. And I don't think this is a sustainable model. So do we, thank you, do we have the courage, like when we see this young man who's threatening violence, do we have the courage to say, no, we're not just going to pick him out because he's problematic. We're going to look at the ways in which the systems we're a part of are holding up the very values that are pushing him to this point. When there's a young mother, right, who's feeling depressed, do we tell her, well, she needs to go get treatment, or do we look at the ways in which we're upholding systems that help along this depression? Reimagine the possibilities for a moment. If we begin to understand that your care is bound up in mine and mine in yours. Thank you.
All right, so I do apologize, it wouldn't let me go full screen, but that is part of why I recommend watching the full video.
Now,
right, so I want to echo some of what we first hear Travis say. We have been trying to use self-care to heal the individual symptoms of systemic issues. Especially for folks with marginalized identity, the labor that it takes to get through every day is often an extra load that we don't know we need a break from until the weight itself gets too heavy to bear. And often, as you mentioned in the boxing example, we focus on bulking up or bandaging our wounds rather than seeking help in carrying it. Now, there are two figures that you see on the screen. On the left is Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, which some of you may be familiar with from whatever class or whatever program. On the right is a socio-ecological model, often used in the public health sector, It's used by the CDC and some of their policies and procedures on their website. It's used by groups like UNICEF, etc. I'd like us to engage with the idea of what these two models could look like together. On the left of where Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, it's often used to discuss the needs of an individual. We need the tiers on the bottom, so there's physiological, the safety needs. We need those to get to that top of the pyramid of self-actualization, which is the goal. It's where we really develop as human beings and individuals. On the right, with the socio-ecological model, it shows how our individual, or what role we play as an individual in our relationships, in our communities, and society overall. As Travis mentioned, what would our world look like when our hierarchy of needs is tied to one another? And what would it mean if I can't reach that self-actualization stage without your help? An argument can be made that we already live in this world. This is what our world already looks like, especially now. If we look at the socio-ecological model again, I, as an individual, don't exist without my society or outside of my society. If you notice, like, all the circles are intertwined with each other. Many of the issues that I face are, again, individual symptoms of systemic issues. And I'm using myself as an example because that's who I feel comfortable talking about, but I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on your own identities, your needs, and your positionality. And I want to note, as Travis did, that it's not easy to think about our issues, think about our own forms of oppression, our own forms of privilege, and confront our role in larger power structures, but they exist within our everyday lives, within our workplace. And I'll provide some examples now of how we can use community care to demonstrate the role that we can play in addressing some societal issues. So I'll start off with a couple examples, but I want us to think about ways that we might already be practicing the concept of community care, what communities of care we might already be a part of. For some, it might be a network of individuals that we share, like Netflix and streaming accounts with. For others, it might be shared childcare networks or carpools. A couple examples that I have up are gentrification, sustainability, and virtual communities. If you're looking for some moments of joy, I encourage you to look up community comes together to, and just enter that in Google and let Google fill in the blanks. And you'll see so many stories of hope and humanity, of community coming together to save a local building or support a local business or help a hometown hero. In saving those buildings and businesses, that group is often persevering against gentrification. And if you're not familiar with the term, I'll do a quick overview, but I do recommend watching a webinar that we have on the Cross Cultural Center YouTube called Gentrification and Houselessness. But back to a quick overview. Gentrification is a process that starts with underserved neighborhoods and areas being identified as areas for potential development for profit, and ending with the displacement of the original community and its inhabitants. When we buy local, either supporting farmers markets, local artists, or other local businesses, we are reinvesting directly in our communities. We're supporting neighbors in our neighborhood rather than larger corporations. Oftentimes, this also supports efforts around sustainability as well. I will note that I don't mean to imply that going to the farmers market this Sunday will save the world, but it might mean the world to the farmer or the vendor that you support. And now we're going to move on to the sustainability example. So the sustainability picture that I have up there is actually from a local farmers market, community garden in San Diego. I believe it was Juniper Elementary or Middle School. In participating in local community gardens, you're getting that vitamin D that we mentioned earlier, getting outside the fresh air, and you're literally in the thick of it with your community members. With intentional planting, you could also be saving local butterfly and bee populations and decolonizing local agriculture through the planting of native wildflowers and other plants native to your area. It's really amazing to think that the simple act of getting out to a local community garden once a week or once a month is in itself a method at chipping away at the block of gentrification, colonization, and environmental racism, which I'll dive into in the next slide. These two examples, buying local and sustainability, are very concrete, tangible ways to engage in the community that's in your neighborhood. But there are many reasons why you may want or need to engage in community in a different way or in addition to your in-person community. I'm not one to promote Facebook or Meta, whatever it's called now. And I think we should be very critical of the ways that our data is used. But I will say there's no denying that the metaverse certainly is a new and interesting way to find community. If any of y'all have played around with it, I'd love to know in the chat. But back to other forms of virtual community, there are plenty of other social media platforms and avenues where you can engage in community virtually. I don't mean downloading like influencer apps or anything like that. This can look very different from person to person, but if you have a particular interest or a particular thing that you're looking for, there's like various search engines you can use. One specific example that I use often is going on Etsy to search, to filter the search options for those that are local crafters to me. And this way I can see like what's around me, what's going on around me, and who I can support. Oftentimes through this method, I find like an artist's Instagram, and then through their Instagram, I can find out that there's a local like vendor meetup or artisan marketplace happening. You can also look for particular hashtags on Instagram. So like hashtag San Diego artist. I used hashtag San Diego hair to find my hairstylist, and I really love her. So that was a really great way to find that. But you can also ask friends, look on Reddit, etc. And one of the benefits of living in the digital age is that you can find anything online. And in this case, the challenge comes in actually trying to go out and engage with it. One other example I'll mention is gaming streamers on Twitch, YouTube, etc. There are such a variety of niche like groups on there. I just saw a TikTok with a streamer who particularly focuses on just playing regular games, but in particular in their chat, they like to make a space that is particularly safe for LGBTQIA plus individuals and making sure that they're supporting that community. Now I want to address some barriers to engaging with community care. Again, we see the familiar word gentrification, environmental racism, and ability and identity. This slide is actually, some of these are actually opposite to the previous examples that I mentioned. And these three examples of barriers intertwine, so it's a little hard to talk about them separately. I want to say I don't have the answers to how we break down each of these barriers, but I'm hoping that seeing them for what they are and acknowledging their interconnectedness brings us that much closer to understanding how we can move forward in spite of them. I talked a little bit about gentrification already. And again, the process of gentrification removes communities, their small businesses, and their inhabitants. Environmental racism refers to environmental injustice that occurs within a racialized context, both in practice and policy. For example, city dumps being located closer to lower income areas, mostly inhabited by people of color, lack of access to clean water in Flint, Michigan, and other areas. And my mention of ability and identity can vary. One example I was thinking of, I'm following another person on TikTok who shows how she navigates the world in a wheelchair. In particular, she shows the way she navigates her campus. Right now, it's very snowy and cold where she is. A lot of times, the pathways to the front of the buildings have been plowed, and anyone who is walking is easily able to get into the building. But the wheelchair ramps that she depends on to get into buildings are not plowed, and they're full of snow. Her wheelchair wheels get all backed up and she's not able to enter. She then decides to go all the way around the building just to find that the other entrance has a step to it, so she also can't get in through that way. So that's one example of ability preventing some folks from being able to access community care. Another example in identity, for myself as a woman, I may feel sometimes uncomfortable trying out something new. In particular, I like to have like a friend around me. I also like always share my location with folks when I'm trying something new, or let them know that I'm going to this new place just in case, because the world we live in is the world we live in, and I watch a lot of true crime. But any one of these barriers may prevent me or anyone else from accessing and participating in community and feeling safe in doing so. And at times they may all work together to do so. And going back to the ideas around buying local and sustainability, how healthy can a community be if there are no local businesses, no local community gardens or parks, if your community garden is not accessible, And if you don't have the ability to satisfy those first couple of layers on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how do you even think like, oh yeah, I'm going to go support local artists this weekend? Like, you're going to be focused on filling your survival needs first. And this is where all these barriers come in, which demonstrates that all of these concepts are interconnected, and it's through intersectional work within our communities that we can start to break down these barriers to health and happiness and systematically tear down these systems of power. We do have power to address some of these issues, for example, participating in local elections, calling city council members, and most importantly, talking to other members of the community. I might not even know what folks around me are facing or what their concerns are if I don't talk to them or communicate with them either in person or through social media platforms. And now I'm going to pass it to Juliana, who has our next discussion question.
Yeah, so this is like a two-part question. So what community care methods are you already practicing, and what communities of care are you a part of? And I also saw there was a comment in the chat addressing a previous slide. You can even use Amazon, find the product you want, and many times there are small businesses selling on Amazon. You can go and buy directly from their website. Yeah, that's a great example. I've also been noticing recently, there's like a lot of attempts to support local business. This weekend, I believe there is a small vendors fair supporting local artists and local communities. So just encouraging, buying local and supporting smaller businesses. I know for me, some community care methods that I'm practicing are just being more active in the communities that I'm already involved in, especially like in terms of my friend community. I know that over the pandemic, there has been a lot more attempts at staying connected via social media and planning super intentional time to just be with one another and give that space to each other where we can talk about what's going on in our lives, how we're feeling, and really holding that space for care and compassion. Also just organizing more like fun, lighthearted things like Netflix watch parties or playing Among Us. And that was definitely a thing towards the beginning of the pandemic, but I think people still practice that. And I'm definitely a part of the LGBTQ community. So I know that in this community, there's also been attempts at coming together, and there's a resource that I'll provide later. There's a group called Creating the Path where it's LGBT ran and led group where you meet up to go on hikes together. So that's definitely something I've been a part of and I'm looking forward to continue being part of. And I don't know if Izzy wants to share also.
Yeah, I also agree that like being more involved in the communities I'm already a part of, particularly here like at UCSD as staff. This year I've tried to take on more, getting back involved with the Native American community and that part of my identity. So supporting the Intertribal Resource Center through participating in the Powwow Committee and Native American Heritage Month planning was really important to me and really restored some of my energy. Even though we were like doing a lot and working a lot, it was really restorative work. So I found that really like restorative. I keep using that word, but it was really important to my self-care to be a part of that community. And this was before I even knew what community care was. I think we can move on. Y'all are welcome to share in the chat if you have other community care methods to share or communities of care that you are a part of.
So yeah, I wanted to just build off of what Izzy has been talking about. As she touched on, there are many systems of oppression in place that seek to create a distance between us and the people around us. And it makes us feel like our struggles are separate or different than the ones around us, but we don't exist in a vacuum, and our experiences are intrinsically tied to everyone around us. And that's why it is so important to not only be there for ourselves, but to be there for others and practice that care and compassion for one another. We've been trained to adapt to an individual mindset, which, is facilitated through capitalism. And it tells us that we have to fend for ourselves to do better than the people around us. But we have to remember that during the most devastating moments, such as the pandemic that we're living through, community care and not hyper individualism is what allows us to prevail. We can't succeed unless, people around us are succeeding, and we have to make sure that there are systems and networks in place to make sure that we're all being supported and having all of our needs met. But there are definitely challenges that we face to make that happen. So I wanted to go into what community care can look like. As I've mentioned before, we are doing our part by wearing masks, staying home when we feel sick, and getting vaccinated. But there are other ways to engage in this type of care, because not only wearing masks help protect us, but it helps protect the people around us. We also want to engage in dialogue and create spaces where we can help ourselves and help those around us. And this also includes those who are the most marginalized and the most overlooked. So this means talking to elders and immunocompromised people who are housebound and who may be experiencing even more loneliness and social isolation. You can also participate in mutual aid networks and volunteer your time, donating money or supplies to those in need. If you can't find the mutual aid network in your area, you can build your own. And we have provided a resource in the document that we'll share later about how to build your own mutual aid network. You can also simply post what labors or goods you're willing to offer in your local neighborhood groups. So this could mean posting on your own social media, and such as Facebook or Instagram, and just sharing like, hey, I'm gonna go out to the store. Does anyone need anything? Like offering any type of support that you can. I know that I've seen some of my friends who garden and have small gardens in their homes. If they have extra produce, they'll post about it and be like, I have extra tomatoes, if you can pick them up, I'm willing to give them and share them with you. And just, take an inventory of what you have access to and the privileges that you have, and seeing how you can relay that to the community around you. You can also donate money to community care funds like the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which supports many community members who have faced income loss or unemployment. And these funds can help mitigate the impacts of COVID and also helps provide some sort of stability in their lives.
Thank you again, Juliana, for that context. Now we'd like to ask our next discussion question. How have you seen your community step up during the pandemic? I did see some chat responses to the last question, which I think are also relevant to this question as well. But for myself, I have been lucky to work at the Cross Cultural Center throughout this pandemic, and we have been through 3 different cohorts of interns, at least like who has been in the pandemic with us at some portion of it. And it's really interesting to see how these students have been so committed to supporting their communities in different ways. I remember the first cohort took the initiative to create a document full of resources for education, learning, action, and impact. It was some title like that. I believe we still have it on our link tree, which we'll share at the end. And that document they created on their own through their own initiative in the spring of 2020, when there was a lot of uproar around the continued fight for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I thought that was so amazing that they took the initiative to do it themselves, especially during the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't know what was going on really. And then we've had now, like, they're just, all the students are so committed to supporting each other in various ways, like through continued education workshops, through one-to-ones, through the planning of different events. And even now, like, we're still navigating what campus life looks like, what the world looks like, but they're still very committed to supporting one another. And I think that's been really amazing. And just to mention those other chat messages that I mentioned, one person mentioned that a friend of theirs created a group of 8 people to support her postpartum with her newborn. So they check in with her weekly, help run errands, and step in when other needs emerge. I think that's so important. There's that saying, it takes a village, right? And I think that is like a quintessential saying of community care, even beyond the raising of children or newborns. It just takes a village. And someone else said, I try to practice donating to local mutual aid groups routinely when I can, especially to those groups where I know donations are going directly to the community. Yeah, that is so important. And Juliana is actually going to mention some mutual aids in the coming slides.
So yeah, I just wanted to continue talking about the ways in which our communities have stepped up to provide care. Community and community care can look like many different things. And I wanted to just provide examples of people doing community care work, from mutual aid groups providing basic needs such as food, to groups that are using art or exercise to build community. It's very important now to find places and people that bring us joy. And having fun and exercising and creating art are always ways that we can help sustain ourselves and also help develop that network and that system that we can look to and rely on. So I have a few examples here. The first example is Mariposa Healing. They are an alternative and holistic health service supporting cutie BIPOC in their healing transformation. So this person in particular really emphasizes the importance of movement and just moving your body and exercising and dancing and just really doing what makes you feel good and not really trying to pay attention to like standards of movement or like looking a certain way. They really champion this idea of like doing what feels good for you. And they also really champion looking at like ancestral knowledge and different types of healing that maybe aren't really practiced or observed or discussed in the Western world. And that's a thing I think I really want to highlight too, is that community care is intersectional in that there are so many identities and communities that need support and have so many different types of needs, and oftentimes looking to more whitewashed or Western centric ways of community care are not always the solution. So always looking to your own culture and your own communities to find that type of care. Another example is mutual aid at UCSD, mutual aid for staff, students, and contingent faculty. This is a group here on campus. They have a very active Instagram where they post a lot of the opportunities that they offer. An example is they had a Doyle Park Community Hang and Mutual Aid Drive. So this is a great example of like building community and also using that community to help others. So they met up and collected different things like food, clothing, and distributed to people in San Diego. And a group I mentioned earlier, they're called Queering the Path. And this is a queer and trans BIPOC led and centered outdoor meetup group in San Diego since 2019. And yes, they oftentimes do hikes around San Diego. And this is just a great way to also get outside, get your body moving, meet people that you can further build your community with. And an important tenet of self-care is helping to alleviate stress, and often exercise is one of the best ways to do that. And I really appreciate this group's attention to issues of accessibility. Oftentimes the hikes that they offer and provide are accessible and very conscientious of different people's levels of mobility. And they are also very supportive, and they are a great group. And I highly recommend if you're looking for an opportunity to meet other people. Another group is Mutual Boundaries. They are a decolonial counter-mapping project for locating and connecting cultural communities and social movements in SD and TJ. I thought this was a really cool project because, like we mentioned before, gentrification and other things like capitalism really seek to divide communities. And us being so close to the border, we sometimes don't think about our communities in TJ and our neighbors. And this project is really helping create this like holistic image of what our community really looks like in San Diego, being so south, and helping us connect with other people that we may often not connect with. The Brown Building is a radical and street wellness community center and event space ran by Black and Brown Indigenous people. And they are similar to the Cross Cultural Center in that they provide a lot of different educational programming, and they often focus on art as a means of activism and as a means of cultivating community. So they have a lot of educational programs, and they're actually having an art reception this weekend, highlighting the voices of trans folk in San Diego, really emphasizing BIPOC voices as well. And another group is the Very Good Food Foundation. They build initiatives around food security and food education in San Diego to create a stronger local food system. So as we know, not everyone has access to good food. A lot of people live in food deserts. So this project is really good at providing produce to those who may not usually have access to, and just realizing that food is also part of self-care. You know, it is something that nourishes our physical body, our spiritual bodies, and it's a super important tenet of community care as well, making sure that we not only have access to food, but those around us have access to consistent food.
So that's the end of the content that we have for you all, but we'd still like to talk about some different questions for continued exploration. Some that we have on the screen is, what does self-care and community care look like for you? What communities of care are you a part of already? And what communities of care could you join? And I will note that as staff at UC San Diego, we are all part of the community of our offices, our departments, our units, and the UC San Diego community. So it's important to think about how can we care for that community, since we're all sharing space together today. And in a few slides, we'll share some resources that exist for that already. And just one other thing I wanted to note before we wrap up for today is that self-care and community care go hand in hand. So I hope we didn't come off that, you know, self-care is not important anymore or anything like that. They really rely on each other. And sometimes you might need to put a pause on one to do the other. Sometimes you can't do one without the other. And sometimes you need to do both at the same time. So I know it can be very messy. And like I said earlier, it's hard to confront the position that you play within our society and acknowledge the amount of power that we have. But it's important that we continue these conversations. So as Juliana mentioned, and as I mentioned, we can start breaking down these systems that seek to break our communities apart. So again, power to the people. And I hope you can think of some ways that you can engage with the community around you beyond some of the examples that we've shared. And if you have any you'd like to share, please do so in chat, and we'll be sure to add those to the document that we are about to share.
Yeah, so here are some resources and further learning. So for UCSD faculty and staff, we have the assistance program, the staff associations at UCSD. We are also fortunate to access Headspace for free using our UCSD email. And there also is a resource that we have linked for undocumented Californians to help those who are undocumented find access to resources. And I will be including the link to this resource guide in the chat.
We also have some resources for further learning as well, some of the webinars that I mentioned, and links to the full TED Talk that I showed, as well as another one I think is really relevant. Two that I want to point out are the Self-Care as Resistance webinar done by our interns, and the gentrification webinar, which I messed up on the title here. It's actually called Gentrification and Houselessness, but it is a great 101 on the topic, and that link can be found on our YouTube. And again, before we wrap up, if you have any feedback for our presentation today, we'd love to hear it. Please fill out this link, which is tinyurl.com/UCSD CCC staff workshop survey. You can scan the QR code, and Juliana will also put this link in the chat, and you can provide us with your feedback for today. I'll leave that up for just a few minutes, and don't leave yet because we have one more slide with some resources. But I'm just talking to fill space as everyone gets the link and scans the QR code. Again, feel free to share any resources in the chat so we can add those to our document. And now I feel confident that everyone has the link, so I'll move on to the last slide.
Yeah, thank you so much again for being here and sharing this space with us. I hope you learned a little more about what community care is and what it can look like. And we just wanted to also mention that we are going to be doing another talk, another equity talk called Marketing Matters. This will be held on week 9, Thursday, March 3rd, from 12 to 1, so the same time as today. And we will be discussing the importance of representation in marketing. And we will also be doing a quick Canva tutorial at the end to show y'all how to use Canva and the different resources that they have on their website. If you would like, we encourage you to follow us on Instagram. We have a lot of educational programming that's happening on there as well as we promote our different events. So you can stay up to date with that. And our YouTube also has our recordings from our past programs, and this one will also be uploaded to YouTube. So if you wanted to revisit whatever we talked about today, you are welcome to do so through our YouTube. And we also have a Facebook page at UCSD Cross Cultural Center where we stay active. And if you have any questions, you can message us through there as well as our Instagram.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to being in community together, either virtually or in person soon enough. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you.